how did you start the Bard? And when did you start the Bard? Probably more importantly.
It feels like a very long time ago now. In over 25 years ago, Emma, I had a huge interest in Irish mythology as a psychotherapist working with individuals and their dreams. I'm a Jungian psychotherapist, and a lot of the characters of Irish myth were appearing in people's dreams. And I know that Sandy from was working in the business world and working with brands, and so he was interested in stories, and from that perspective, so we thought we would see if people were interested in our Irish myths. So we decided to have an event here in Dublin, actually, in the Pearse Museum. And why we chose the Pearse Museum is because Pádraig Pearse, who was one of the leaders of the 1916 Rising and was a poet himself and also an educator, and his school was in, it's now a museum, the Pearse Museum was a school, and he used Irish mythology in teaching the children. And so we had our first Bard gathering with Irish poets as well, because one of the things that we were very keen to do was to make sure that we included the poets. And we had Evan Boland and Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill and John F. Dean. And anyway, so we put it out there, and as you know, as the invitation was to explore an Irish myth and to see if it had contemporary relevance. We had about 35 people responded, and we had a fantastic time, really fun time. And of course, the group definitely found that there was wonderful wisdom in the old stories and that there was contemporary relevance. But it was fun. That was the marvelous thing. I think we laughed our way through the whole weekend, as well as also seeing the serious nature and the contemporary relevance of the myths. But our main thing was that if it worked in the Pearse Museum, we were going to take it to Clare Island, which is a wonderful island in Clew Bay. There are 365 islands. Clare Island is the biggest island, and we went to Clare Island the following year and have been going there ever since. And we play with an Irish myth, a theme, to see if it has contemporary relevance. We also include the islanders because they are what marvelous storytellers themselves and have continued the tradition, the oral tradition, and also are great dancers. So we have an island night, and that's very often the highlight of the few days that we have on Clare Island.
Yeah, that's the summer school, as you mentioned. Yeah,
yes,
that's the summer school. And obviously we're in strange times, and so now we've had to move online. So why did we move the Bard online?
Well, we had been meeting, as you say, on Clare Island for 25 years, and we thought, would it be possible to reach out to people virtually and see if this might work using the new technology? And lo and behold, of course, it does work because the new technology that we're using is Zoom. And what that affords us to do is to go into breakout rooms where we can have smaller, intimate conversations and, go deeper into the stories in terms of finding the relevance. And I think the thing that has been different is that we retell the story, like that the group itself retells either an element of the story or aspects of the story that touch them. And at the end of the immersion in the story, the big group breaks into smaller groups and they do a retelling, and that has been marvelous. And the creativity that has been let loose on us is just amazing. And I think we recently had the retelling after the immersion in the most recent experience of the Bard, and I mean we were all blown away with the creativity that we experienced with the retellings.
And so who would Irish mythology appeal to, or what are the advantages of being online? do you think it has brought?
Well, what it has done, it has actually opened us up to other people coming from other parts of the world. And while we have some people who have Irish connections, they like to reconnect to, uh, it might have been their grandfather or grandmother emigrated from Ireland, or even great grandparents, and they feel that they have a link. And what the Bard offers them is, a way to really meet at a very deep level, I suppose. But not only people who have an Irish link, people who are interested in stories and interested in mythology. Obviously, Freud would say that the dream is the link to the individual unconscious, and that the myth is the dream of a nation, or the dream of a culture. So, looking at it like that, I think it brings us into a whole other realm.
Absolutely. I think you may have answered this one. So, why do you personally love Irish mythology?
Well, it continuously reveals new things when you go back to it. So, for example, we repeated some of the stories over the 25 years, and every time we go, even if the same story, there are new revelations, and that's so exciting. So you're all the time learning, and that in itself is exciting.
Yeah. And in these troubled times, what can we learn from it? What are the wisdoms within it?
Well, I think that's when we play with the myth, individuals learn things for themselves, and I suppose uh, what we learn is when you play. And that's what the myths allow us to do. They allow us to play, and they allow us to say things in the words of the story that maybe we mightn't be able to say, in our ordinary everyday conversations. So the characters in the myth afford us a freedom to say things and to explore other aspects of ourselves without necessarily, saying this is me, and I actually feel very envious, or I feel quite queenly, if so I associate very much with Queen Maeve or something of that nature. It affords you to, as I say, to play with elements that you mightn't be able to do in an ordinary day situation.
Absolutely. And do you think the Irish actually connect with their own mythology?
Well, I think this is very interesting because in the 1916 Rising, as you know, mythology was very much to the fore, in that Cuchulainn, who was the wonderful warrior in our Irish mythology, he was used as a symbol, and I think, and then subsequently. He was used in what we could refer to as the Northern Irish Troubles, but on both sides of the divide. Now, he's quite the Terminator character, but we have other myths that we need to explore. That myths, for example, are king and queen myths, and we have wonderful female characters in our myths that need to be brought to the fore. And I think this whole movement to embracing the feminine is possible in our by looking at other myths other than the ones that you would need when you're trying to get your own independence. So you need the warrior, for example, when you want to gain independence. But now, where we're 100 years on from having our independence, we need to tap into particularly the wonderful the goddesses within our culture, like Danu, like Maeve, like Bridget. These are marvelous characters in our mythology that we could delve deeper into their characters and begin to re-own them, I think, in a new way.
Um, and how come we have these stories? Who recorded these stories, and how do we still have them to study today?
Well, I think that we must give a big thank you to the monks who wrote down the stories. Our tradition uh, of storytelling lasted a lot longer than the Greek tradition of storytelling, for example, 1,000 years longer. In other words, it took where we wrote down our myths 1,000 years after the Greeks wrote down their myths, so they remained in the oral tradition. But the monks wrote them down. Now, some of them are written down with, and they have a Christian twist to them, but they still retain the essence of the story, and that's really good. And of course, we have old manuscripts that are there in the universities around, not just in the Irish universities, but around the world, for example. And then in the 1930s, the Folklore Commission uh, collected stories, got the young children in the primary schools to go into their neighborhoods and collect stories from the older members of their communities. So, and a lot of those, and they're available in the folklore department in UCD, the University College Dublin.
Absolutely. So yeah, here on the bar we do retell the stories orally, so to return them back to the oral tradition, and that's where enlightens all the, it's what we start with, isn't it, on the bard, that it's going back to the stories.
Yeah, we go back to the stories that are written down, but the thing about storytelling is that when you're telling a story, you're telling it from your perspective, but the people who are listening to it are hearing it from their own experience. So, like, storytelling is not static, and so while the myths have been written down and that kind of then they're static at one level. But this is why it's so important to actually play with them so that they can, in the oral tradition, then we're really back to what the purpose of them was in the first place, how you learn from these stories.
Absolutely. And what do you learn? What is a wisdom tradition?
A wisdom tradition. I'm not quite sure what a wisdom tradition is, but I do know that from my experience of the wisdom that is deeply embedded in these old stories when they are retold in today's world, we can learn so much from them. And we do learn from them. And, the experience and the evidence is there from 25 years or more of the Bard Summer School and now the Bard online, that continually the evidence is there to show that this works.
Who do you think this course is for?
Anybody interested in learning about themselves, about culture, about today's world, about what goes on underneath. I suppose I like to use the analogy of the iceberg. 25% is visible, but there's 75% going on underneath. And I think what the myth does is it brings us to the 75%.
Absolutely. And I think one last question: do you have a favorite character from Irish mythology, or one that you specifically resonates with you?
Well, I like Maeve. I think she's got a bad press, but I think she was fantastic. And I have to say, Alil, her husband, wasn't a bad character. Now sadly the way it developed in terms of like the consequence of them looking and having equal amount of land and ownership of cattle, etc., that led to a terrible battle. However, there was the desire to have equality.
Yes. One of the great queens in Irish mythology is Maeve. Yes, absolutely.